So let's start. My name is Tatiana Mironova, and I am a part of our group and our project that is called Place of Art. And we are starting a series of interviews dedicated to the works of artists, researchers, whose projects are related to the question of collaboration and working with the audience, working with people. And we would like to understand how these projects work, how they constructed, and we want to expand the geography of contemporary art because in our project, we talk a lot about decentralization and decolonization, and it's a huge part of our discussion. So we want to continue this discussion, and especially now when we unfortunately find ourselves in a situation of isolation in some point, and there are few exhibitions, there are not a lot of spaces to discuss, and the opportunity to communicate online and meet online is quite important for us. So we are very happy today to welcome the artist Felipe Mujica. Thank you for joining us. And an artist who was born in Chile and lives and works between Europe and America. And I think we will ask you about that also today. And I think we can start with some more general questions and then turn to our talk about some projects of yours. And I think I will give the word to Natalia.
Thank you. I'm Natalia Smolyanskaya. Hi, Felipe.
Hi, Natalia.
I'm really happy to see you here. I first came across your works when I was researching Manuel Casanueva's pedagogical and artistic practices. It was an exhibition that you curated back in 2016 called The Player's Ball, the Ball's Field. And I'm very happy to have been able to meet you and talk to you. And my first question is about your origin. You were born and raised in Chile, but you currently work in Belgium and America. How important is it for you to stay connected with your culture? And how has your relationship with Chilean culture influenced you personally and artistically, especially in the context of your international artistic practice?
Well, first of all, thank you, Natalia, for the questions, and thank you all for inviting me, for having me here. Yes, I come from Chile. I was born in Chile, but I have a very sort of nomadic life since a baby. I was born in 74, which is also very intense and complicated period of Chile, of the history of Chile, politically, especially because of the military coup that was, of course, guided and supported by the U.S. government and the CIA. They caused basically and financed the conditions to create this military coup. And the way it was an important moment, especially in Latin America, and this is in the context, of course, of the Cold War, which you, of course, very know much better than I do, maybe. But in Chile, it was important because Salvador Allende, who was the president elected in 1970, was the first socialist government elected by democratic means, and he was basically vouching for a democratic alternative or socialist alternative, socialist route. So my parents were exiled. I grew up in London. I lived in London since maybe a little bit. I arrived maybe 10 months old, and I lived there till almost 9 years. So Chile also was very, my first language when I was growing up was English, of course. And we moved back to Chile with my mother and my brother in 83. still a very politically intense moment for Chile. With that was also the time when it was the beginning, sort of of popular massive protests on the streets and international pressure a little bit. At that point, also the U.S. government realized that the human rights violations were too many and too spread, so they also sort of changed their position to pressure the Chilean government to return to a democratic path. And so I grew up in this context, and my childhood was marked between different languages, different cultures, and also in this sort of very charged political environment. So I think that also it's reflected on my work and the way I have been able to work in different places and different contexts with different people. I think I since very early I was very sort of trained, if you could say, in a way to just to have a very open mind and to be able to understand different people and to work with different contexts. And then Chile was very important too, because even though I grew up in London, when I went back to Chile, I was 9. And I think these years when you become a teenager and then an adult, they're very formative. So also, I lived in Chile between 9 years old and 25, which is more or less when I moved to New York first. Um, and and again, it was very politically intense. There was massive demonstrations on the street against Pinochet. There was a referendum in 99, which finally got rid of Pinochet, this vote yes or no. And then with the transition to democracy in the 1990s, early 90s. And living in that context, not only the political aspect of it, but also it made me aware of sort of social injustices and the disparity of wealth and poverty, basically. Because if I grew up in Europe, I wouldn't have maybe that first encounter with, or first sort of reading or direct understanding of poverty and a system that went completely 360 degrees. So Chile intended to be a more equal country, a more socialist-based country with more opportunities for everyone in a democratic way, change into a neoliberal economy, and in some ways much harsher than even the US. Like, for example, we don't in the US. I now, because I lived in the United States, I have even if it's not a lot of money, I will have a pension when I'm 65 or 67. I can choose when I retire. The longer I wait, I will get more money. And in Chile, this is very hard, like especially as a freelancer. If you freelance or as an artist, it's almost impossible to have a decent pension. Like examples like this. Or also living in New York, my son, we were able to send him to a public school, a good public school in a neighborhood. He had access to good public health, and all free. Even his college education was free, because here it depends on the income of the parents, how much you pay in public school, not in public. Sorry. And so all this sort of made me understand the sort of this context of fragility that we have in Chile and in Latin America, that everything is very fragile, and you can see this in the society structures, in education, and of course in the arts, and how institutions run, function, are funded, how artists are treated, and so on. Like it's and being able to build a career in the US and also in Europe. Of course, I have the privilege of also working in different contexts and in more professional environments. But for me, it's also very important to go back to Chile and to Latin America, because there's also, I understand, sort of like I don't want to say cleverness or smartness, but an awareness of the precarious, and I think this precariousness, and to work with it in an interesting way, can be very effective politically and poetically. And I think sometimes this can be lost when you have too much opportunities or too much funding or too much, or if your artwork enters the art market directly and you start making a lot of money directly, which in New York at least it's a very art-driven market or sort of art circuit. So yes, I will say this is important, that my relation with Chile is basically it made me more sensitive to subtleties, to subtle things, and this I think is you can see it in the textile work. The way I collaborate with people, the way I integrate different knowledges of textiles, and also as a way to make the work also more participatory, not only in installation and how it dialogues with architecture and the public, but also in the production of the work.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you for the answer, and I think we can move forward to our other questions, and then maybe in the end we can everyone who is with us today, also my colleagues from the Place of Art project. I'm sorry, I forgot to introduce them at the beginning, but today it's Paulina, Victoria, and Christina are with us, and I hope in the end we can have a free conversation, and maybe you will have questions to ask. But now I want to talk about the project Curtains that we are very interested in, and we talked about it. And as far as I understand, it is a long-running project, and I want to ask you if you could describe its major stages and how this project changed with time.
Mhm.
And the second aspect is the question of people who are involved. And as far as we understand, it's very different people from different places who participate in it.
Mhm.
And what are their role and what are their contribution, and why this collaboration is important to you in general.
Sure.
And mhm.
Do you want me to show images while I talk? Or
Yes, I think it will be great.
sure, let me share here. So the PDF that I selected is basically a section of a book that I published a couple of years ago, which is a book. We could say it's like my first monographic book, or sort of a retrospective looking book into my curtain practice, the textile practice. And the book has a series of texts in English and Spanish by three different people, different curators, friends, people that I have collaborated in the past. And then there's a section of images. And for the image section, I decided to, besides showing images of the work, I also wanted to show image of the people and the different places and contexts that these projects have developed, or, where they developed. And this color section starts with this text, which is on one side in Spanish and one side in English. And it's a text that basically describes sort of the journey of the curtains, like from the first one to the last. And this is also a text that I see can grow in time. So it's sort of a woven text. It's a textile text. It's a text that is also a fabric that can grow in time, that sort of weaves itself. For example, this was published in 2022, and since then I have done more projects. So in the next time I publish it, or if I use it, it will grow. It grows as I complete projects. So it's a statement, and it's important to me to mention the people and the places where I worked. And sometimes it's one person, sometimes it's two, sometimes it's a collective, sometimes it's a cooperative, sometimes it could also be a workshop that I invite people to come and work with me. And from all different cultures, from Latin America to Europe to the US, sometimes indigenous people, sometimes just a group of women who like to embroider and spend time together. So this is sort of the beginning of this section. Sorry, here that we have the color images. And and this I started with this one, of course, because it's the first curtain. And just as a sort of an introduction to how I reached this idea, well, I studied in Chile in the 90s, and in a school that had a very, and I'm not going to go extend too much here, but I think it's important that we had a very sort of formal training, with painting and drawing and engraving, uh, printmaking, and then you also have to choose a sort of a mention, and I chose printmaking. So, and I was interested in printmaking basically because of the process. I was interested in the process of printmaking and how you can experiment in this process. And so, from very early, for me, the process was more important almost than the result. And in this experimentation with printmaking, I ended up basically printing uh, color fills on paper, of course, but then also on adhesive paper, and these adhesive papers will go on the wall. So the work also became installation, an installative type of work. It wasn't uh, traditional printmaking. And from the walls, I also started experimenting with different materials, with wood, with acrylic, and sort of experimenting with space, taking it out of the wall, um, uh, playing with architecture also, temporary architecture situations. But these materials like wood and acrylic were very sort of, I understood and I realized after a few years or after a few experiments that they were very uh, complicated in a way that how you store them, how you transport them. And for me, living in New York in a context where everything is very expensive, I mean, now even more than 20 years ago, but like to have a studio was a real luxury. I didn't have the means to have a studio. I worked from home. Um, and I also was traveling a lot frequently to Chile, maybe to visit family or to have a show. And so for this exhibition, which is also in Chile, uh, at the time I was experimenting with video work and with sound, and I needed to create a curtain to darken the space. And I realized and immediately that I didn't want to put a black curtain. That a black curtain for me was sort of a symbol of the cliche of a video artist. You put a black curtain and then you have a video. And I wasn't a video artist. I was experimenting, and it was also a video based more on sound than on image. Um, so I said, well, why don't do I do a geometric, colorful curtain? And I have met someone in Chile, Miriam, and she's a seamstress, and so we worked together. And this was the first time that I did a curtain, that I collaborated with someone. I bought the fabric, I cut the fabric, but she did all the sewing, and basically it was an immediate sort of an eureka moment for me, because it immediately brought my attention, or sort of captured my attention, the fragility of this material and how effective it was. You fold it, it could be transported in a small box or a small suitcase. Um, and then it expands in space and occupies space in a very sort of definitive way, but also in a very subtle way. Like the way it moves with the wind or the sea, it's a little bit translucent. Um, it's a divider, but it also sort of inviting to people to come in. Um, so I saw immediately this sort of potential in the textile, in the fabric, how it occupies space and how it functions in space. On this next spread, we have Miriam here with her sister, Ana Maria, and with them I've collaborated over the years in different projects. Like this was the first project we did together in 2006, and then we did 2007 another project, 2011, 2015, and so on. Like every time I go back to Chile, and if I need to do something, I collaborate with Miriam. And then on the right side, we have a photo of a exhibition space. This was an artist initiative of some friends in Germany, in Berlin. So I wasn't able to travel, but I could send the fabric. Or I think even a friend took it with him. And here it's interesting because again, it was very effective in terms of of sort of jumping sort of this formality of oh, you have to pack a work, you have to crate it, you have to ship it. And it sort of could be, it infiltrates in the luggage, it's like a piece of clothing. It's like a piece of, like anything you can put in your luggage. Um, it sort of disguises, it's an art piece, but it's also, just a piece of cloth. Um, and then again here, I didn't know the space personally, but my friend said, hey, the curtain has the same size of the window. Why don't we put it on the window? So, and that was also another sort of interesting moment because the way I work too is I prefer to, and not prefer, but this is how it's happened over the years, that I understand the work is teaching me, the work is showing me things, and not the other way around. Not that I take decisions and I said, oh, I want to do this because this functions this way, and it has to be this way. No, I sort of absorb what the work is showing me, what the work is telling me, and how the work is also open to other people to make suggestions. And in this case, it was a special suggestion of, the curtain can become a real curtain. It's an out. You can see it from the outdoors, and you can see it from inside. It's also affected by the light. It has this sort of vitro quality. I'm gonna skip this because you can barely see the images. But it's a project drawings based on Rodchenko, which, well, I will not skip it because it's pertinent to the talk now. And so the curtains also became sort of a space, a surface for research. So in this case, I was interested in Rodchenko as an important figure in the Russian avant-garde and in the historic avant-garde of Western just sort of geometric abstraction with a social component. And this is also important because the way we study in Chile, and I think in most countries of Latin America, our teachings are very Eurocentric and US centralized. So we study, the Bauhaus, the Still, the Russian avant-garde, then the New York School and the minimalist in the States, minimalism, so on, and then the conceptual, the post-minimalist, and very not much about Latin American art, and not even I'm talking about political or conceptual Latin American art or experimental art. Uh, we touch that a little bit, of course, we study it, but then we have a whole history of native indigenous art and traditions, and especially if you work with textiles, that is very strong, and it's barely, spoken about. It's in art schools. I'm talking about art schools. This is another project in China, which the drawings are very subtle, but it was interesting for me, the experience in China, because it was also, I understood that people work with textiles in a different way. And because of the Chinese economy and everything has to be produced quickly and fast, this was a very uncomfortable project because they just saw it so fast and the lines were not straight. It was a little bit of a mess. But then I understood that it's also related to the way they produce and the way they understand, okay, you want this. They did it, but in a very sort of capitalism productive way, like as quick as possible. This is another project in Denver, 2010, for Bienal de las Américas. So it's a biennial of the Americas that basically artists, Latin American artists and American artists. And what's important here is that the architectural component, like the architectural components of the curtains started growing, of how they can articulate space, dialogue with space, and also with the public, and how the public interacts with space and with other artworks. So here the curtains also started growing in the sense that they were also, now they have this component that they can become also exhibition design. I could also organize spaces for the other artists' works and then dialogue with other artists. And in this case, the artists were proposed by the curator, but sometimes I have also made shows where I invite artists to dialogue with my curtains, which is also something I did with Manuel Casanueva in 2014. And then that's what you saw later was another show in 2016, Natalia. This is an exhibition also in which is, I think in this book, this is the only images I have of a gallery show. But here, what was important is that I also started understanding and learning that the curtains also behave in different ways. Like it depends where you install them. They can become more architectural, or in this case, one is in front of a window. So again, it's a curtain. Then it can also function as a door if you put it in the entrance, it's sort of a sliding door. Or if you put it in front of the wall, it behaves as a painting. So here, again, learning about from the work that depending on where you install it and how you install it, um, uh, the curtains behave in a different way. Now, also something important is that until now, these pieces, I will design, I will make collages or drawings, sort of sketches, studies, and the colors will be determined and set, and also here. This also has a interactive component because they're hanging on cables, so people were also allowed to move them, the public. And this is also important for me, this ability of the public to touch the work and to sort of break this barrier of you cannot touch artwork. In this case, yes, I invite people to touch the artwork, to physically interact directly with it, because, I didn't know that at the moment, but now I understand that it's also a way to approach the public in a different way. Like not all the artworks have to be completely intellectual. I mean, there's of course there's sensorial, but in this case, it's not only, sensorial, it's also physical. You're literally touching the work and moving it. And that's also another way to understand the work when your body and your actions are directly related to the work. Here again, this is a project in outdoors exhibition space in Italy. Here, I didn't collaborate with people. I just brought the work. I produced this at home. So I also function this way too. And not all the works are made collaboratively. Most of them, yes, but some of them I also produce by my own. And what's interesting here is also the outdoor aspect. Bringing the work outside, and also the interactive element. That basically, if you see the image on the right on the bottom, people can move the curtains as they wish, and the configuration will change, be constantly changing. And here, this is a sort of an important moment too in the history of this project. This is 2014, and this is for Bienal de Cuenca in Ecuador. And the curator who invited me, Manuela Moscoso, she lives in New York and is based in New York, but she's from Ecuador, so she knows the culture pretty well, of course. It's her native country. And she proposed to me to work with this kind of textile, this fabric, which is it's called in Spanish, it's called lanilla. And it's kind of a synthetic fabric, which also this is, as I was producing more projects, I also started understanding that some fabrics behave better than others. For example, cotton is much better. If you want to make straight lines, you have to fold it and iron it. And so there's all this technical stuff. And if 100% cotton is more stable than if you work with synthetic fabrics. Synthetic fabrics, generally, if you want to, because the way the fabric is built, if you want to make a diagonal and you fold it, sometimes synthetic fabrics are not very easy to work with. So I was avoiding synthetic fabrics, but Manuela suggested that I use this lanilla because it's a very traditional fabric for las cholas, because it's the how women, mostly indigenous and mostly mixed race too, of course, with influence of the Spanish colonizers and later migrants in Latin America. Yeah, this is the way they dress. This is the sort of a traditional the way, yes, it's a traditional way of dressing, and they use this very colorful yeah, textiles. So that's on one side. And then also she proposed to collaborate with a local studio, which in this case is these two women, Laura and Nancy. And uh, and also, so that's one aspect, sort of opening up, not only working with medium in Chile or at home, but also now I started opening up to work with different people in different places. And this is sort of the beginning of that. And also the notebook. If you see the notebook, this is the kind of sketches I do. And in this case, I call it an open design. It's not closed. It's the colors are not decided, the combination of colors, the final result. So I left it open. So Nancy and Laura could also propose color combinations. So I will have a set of fabrics for the background and then a set of fabrics for the shapes, which were this lanilla, these very bright colors. And so at the end, it was also a conversation of what background worked well with what bright fabric. And again, these pieces were installed in conversation and in dialogue with space and with other artworks. This is an exhibition in Mexico, in a very interesting space called Museo Experimental El Eco, which is Experimental Museum El Eco, which is a space that was created in the 50s and by an architect and artist, Matias Goritz. I believe he migrated to Mexico from Poland, I believe. Already an architect, very young. And here also there's a sort of, I've done a few projects where also the curtains are in dialogue with sort of important architectural, sites in the history of Latin American architecture. Because what Matias Goritz proposed was what he called a manifesto of arquitectura emocional, the emotional architecture manifest. So for him, the way to understand architecture, he wanted to create something sort of an opposition to the rationality of European modern architecture, where space was also a place to feel, not only to see it as rationality in terms of space and light or functionality, but also space for feeling. And so the spaces of this museum are very strange. There's no straight angles. Everything is a little bit the spaces are not square based or rectangle based. Here also, for a few years in New York, I worked teaching in community centers, doing art workshops for children and for seniors. And here I did this a few times where I will bring the way I work, which is, for example, I have this grid and I play with the grid, which is something very formal too and sort of very traditional, creating different patterns, different color combinations. And I open this my methodology of working with people and propose they draw this. They will first make a drawing and in paper, and then a painting on a larger sheet of paper, and then the textile fabric. So it's also a process that they could see like different stages of the same work. And then they kept the curtains too. I didn't keep them, they kept them. Here's more experimenting with also different formats, with holes, how these holes also function as windows. This is also a project in Guatemala, which this is also important for me because it was the first time that I collaborated with an indigenous woman who was an embroiderer, a Mayan embroiderer. And this experience in Guatemala was very important for me because I being in Guatemala, a very poor country, that was hit with a 50-year civil war that is also it's related to the influence, political influence and interference of the United States, of course. But nonetheless, it's a very rich country in cultural terms, in how indigenous people, survive and protect their traditions, and especially women. To be honest, the men seem pretty lazy, and the women are very hardworking, and they're always weaving, embroidering, taking care of the children, cooking. They do everything, and with absolutely amazing skill. So this is the first time that I invited her, and I hired her, of course, and I will produce the background, the sewing, the cutting, and I also did the embroidery of the edges, but she did the lines, the embroidery of the lines, and here also the project also opens up to uh, I asked them to propose what stitches they think could be interesting, what stitches they know. So this also, I'm not telling them what to do exactly. I just said, I need this line stitch. And then they have within this limits, they can also create something, one has one kind of stitch, the other has a different kind of stitch and so on. And now this is until that point, this I think was the largest project I did, and this was for the Biennale de Sao Paulo in 2016. where I was invited by Jochen Volz, who's a German Brazilian or German but based in Brazil. And he invited me also to collaborate with a studio in Brazil, in Sao Paulo. And instead of working with one studio, I proposed to work with two. And also to create sort of a dialogue between different, in the same city, you can have different understandings of or ways of working with textiles. It's not only one, there's also many different voices in one place. So I work with Alex and Valentina on the left. It is a young couple of friends who had sort of a fashion experimental textile studio. And then on the right, a cooperative of embroiderers in the outskirts of Sao Paulo, in a more popular neighborhood, like an hour away from the center of the city. So it was interesting for me, like you have the young sort of cool kids in the center of Sao Paulo working with textiles, and then you have this group of women, more of a working class background, which many of them also either didn't have a job before or had like very low paid jobs, housemaids or cleaning or janitors or something like this, or maybe in the market selling something. And this cooperative, this way of getting together and learning embroidery and embroidering together and creating a product of very high quality also is a way to enrich their lives, enrich their community, and also to create confidence, that they could also do this, make money, support their family, and also do it in this flexible way too. They have a studio where they meet, but they can also embroider at home, watching TV or in between cooking for their children. So it's also, it has this domestic aspect, which that's why the curtains are called curtains too. Which, if I can go back to the title, the idea of calling these curtains is because I'm interested in that specifically, that they have a domestic aspect. They could be done in a sewing machine at anybody's home. And here too, I asked them to propose stitches, color combinations to the both groups. And then, for example, here on this image, this is Teresina, and originally this was going to be just a triangle made with a line that it could be, thicker maybe because you have to be able to see it from afar. But she proposed to fill in the whole triangle, which was a lot of work. But it was her proposal, and I think it worked great. And then, and so the project is also open to suggestions. Oh, 1 second, please. Yes. And this is how we produced 30 pieces, 15 with one group, 15 with the other. And these 15 were in the first floor, and then the rest was spread out in the entire building using all the floors. On the right here too, and of course, all of them, if except here where on the second row is too high, but on this level, people were also invited to move them, to interact with them. On the right, we have this was a workshop space that the Biennale had, an educational space. So they also invited me to do something here to create this functional, situation where you could either close the space or open the space. This image on the right, on the bottom right, it was sort of like the rest area of the mediation team. So it's also something I'm interested in. I've done it in galleries too. That sometimes not only installing in the main space, but also in the office, in the hallway, like people that work there can actually enjoy it, too. This was a small project because it was like a 1 week residency in Finland, and here the people who invited me came up with the idea of contacting an integration center. So it is educational centers for people who migrate to learn the language and the local culture. And so I work here with two women Farah and yeah, I forgot the other name, sorry. But uh, of course, here there was also a language barrier, so we had to communicate through, the younger one, Farah, she spoke English, but the older woman didn't. So we communicated with Google Translation, and these were placed outdoors. And what I find interesting here too, or beautiful, which is also something I'm again learning all the time, is that the curtains also have a drawing, but then they can also have a second sort of drawing on top, which in this case is the shadow of the trees or the sunlight. And in other moments, it could be the architecture of the space, or if it's in front of a window, how the light affects it. The color brightens up. So the surfaces are always open. I see the curtains as surfaces that are open to different levels of information, of people, of knowledge, of different people, and also spatial situations, light situations, and so on. This is a workshop in Sweden, and I think it was the first workshop I did where we invited people because they couldn't find the curator who invited me here couldn't find a studio or somebody who was willing to work with me. And I also think it has to do with how different textile traditions are in industrialized societies than in non-industrialized societies. So, for example, in Latin America, it's much easier to find people who still embroider or sew or knit, or even weave, weaving, which is like in Europe, nobody will weave manually. But in South America and Latin America, yes, people still weave. Even like what I was saying about the Mayan woman in Guatemala, they still use the waist loom weave, which is the indigenous weave and the traditional way they have been doing it for many generations. And so in Sweden they couldn't find something like this. So in conversation with the curator, we came up with the idea of doing a open workshop, where people will come and learn how to embroider and enjoy time together. And so the production of the piece also became sort of a social club. People will have tea. In Sweden, they have this very strong tradition called fika, which is like a break in the middle of the morning, middle of the day, afternoon, to have a cup of coffee, tea, um, and so on. And then there was one woman who came who brought all her friends. She had sort of like a small embroidery club, and this also I started learning here that the workshop format is also another way of sort of communicating the work and what the project is about. So the work on it doesn't, I mean, interact with people in the exhibition, especially by touching it too, but also in the production. Like the production moment can also be a way, especially in the context of sort of the format of the workshop, um, a way to talk about art, to talk about what I want, or what I'm looking for, and also create this moment of sort of a dialogue or a two-way learning situation where I learn from them and they learn from me. And the work at the end is something that we create together that I wouldn't made on my own possibly, and they couldn't make on their own. Um, so this is also an important aspect, how the workshops became to be sort of an important moment too, of sharing the work. This is in Mexico with Marcos and Laura, a couple of Huichol artisans. Huichol is an indigenous culture from like the center north of Mexico, and they have this very interesting cosmology and way of representing, animals and sacred animals, the 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 spiritual world and the world we live in. And because here in the center, what you have is the flower of the peyote, and all their rituals, traditional rituals, are done using peyote. So it's a very sort of psychedelic culture, and the way they express it with forms and colors is also very psychedelic. Um, and I noticed on most of the artisany they have, you see how each figure has different lines of color, and like inside and outside. And I understand this as a way to understand that the limits between the, this and the outside world is not that definitive. It's porous. And so I asked him if the lines they could make on the curtains will also have this component of more than one color, 2, 3, 4 colors. And here was also interesting because I believe it was the first time for Huichol people to have their sort of techniques and tradition of embroidering and also working with beads in a contemporary art context. This is a project in the Dominican Republic, which is also interesting because sometimes if I could, for example, here I was invited by a couple of artists that had a project called Sindicato. And to be honest, I did a research trip, and there's places also that barely have textile tradition, that either disappeared or because of climate they don't really have a strong textile tradition. So here I basically ended up collaborating with these two people. One, Damara was a seamstress, and Juan Carlos, he's a painter, and he painted. We will prepare the backgrounds and so on, but then he painted the backgrounds and he proposed this gradation of color. He proposed the white line. All this in conversation with him. So I understood that there's also ways that I could work in contexts that also don't have strong textile traditions. In the Dominican Republic, there's a more painterly tradition, and in his case, he will paint. For example, if you have a hair salon, on the walls outside, he will probably paint the name of the salon, but also a little hair dryer, a little pair of scissors, and like this kind of old school uh, signages, hand painted signages for a small business. And then also I encountered here that there's also a strong tradition in painting and with color and form and abstraction, but applied to homes and to the facades of homes, which is basically vernacular architecture. Most of them, all of them, I will say, very humble homes. But people have this sort of creative energy, and it's sort of a non-spoken contest of who has the coolest home with the more colorful. And you saw in very different styles, wood, very basic, and more cement, sort of built more modern in a way, but always color. And then I propose also to create this dialogue with the curtains and the houses, which this became a book at the end. I made a book of this. And this is a similar situation in also residency in Nicaragua. And again, in Nicaragua, there's not a strong textile tradition, but there's a painterly tradition. And this was an invitation in a place called Solentiname, which is in the middle of Nicaragua. Has a huge lake in the center called Lake Nicaragua, the Great Lake of Nicaragua. And this is sort of a small, we could say, artist colony, or artist outpost that was funded by a priest, a leftist priest called Ernesto Cardenal in the late 60s, early 70s. And he basically moved to this island, and he was a sculptor, a poet, a priest, and a leftist politician. And he will invite other artists and painters and writers to come to the island and to interact with people who live there, who are mostly fishermen or farmers. And they develop this style of painting and with sculptures, and also this sort of naive, or not naive, but like primitive way of painting of nature and the landscape. So here I work with the gradations, like you see this animal here has a whole red, yellow, green, blue. So we try to accomplish something similar on the background of the curtains, and then again work with white lines. And it's also done collectively with a studio that they paint, these animal figures, and they carve and they paint the animal figures. And again, photo documentation also, it's becoming more important as a way of sort of just registering how the works dialogue with the place where they're produced, with that particular culture and geography. And here we are in the last stretch of the. Am I taking too long? It's okay.
Yes, it's okay.
It's okay.
Okay. If you have any questions, let me know. You can interrupt.
Yeah, I think we have, but maybe later.
Okay.
After the.
And this is also sort of a large project for an exhibition in Miami, in the Paris Art Museum. And here, the curator also, after many discussions and sort of brainstorming, we decided to invite or to find a Mikosuki artisan. The Mikosuki people is a Native American tribe from South Florida. They live in the Everglades, which is this sort of huge river, very low river on north of Miami, and they have this traditional, or they use a tradition of patchwork, and the patchwork is basically these long stripes of abstractions, and each one is, most of them, not all of them, but most of them, and the most traditional ones are abstractions of nature of the elements. So some of them are like um, can be called fire or turtleneck or like man on horse or frog, um, lightning, big storm. And so these are the kinds of names they have. And this project also became, what was important for me was how to make these two histories of abstraction dialogue and fuse sort of into one project, but also, maintaining sort of the independence of each, but also, working together. So we have my sort of background of abstraction, of geometric abstraction, of, all the sort of Western education that I was imposed. And then we have this, the Native American understanding of abstraction, which is applied to clothing. You see here how they wear in the dresses. Each dress has a different rows of patchwork. And again, these pieces are interactive. People can move them. And this is details of the patchworks. And again, here was, for them, it was very interesting. I mean, for me too, but I think for them it was very rewarding in the sense, or for everybody, I think it was the first time their tradition of patchwork was exhibited um, in a contemporary art space museum in Miami ever. They have never done this before, and I also think it's beautiful in the sense that and this is also something that I sort of push for, which is, people who work with handcraft or, craft traditions normally have a scale that is very domestic, like a pillow or something to cover toilet paper, or, in Chile it's very, people knit and make covers for everything, especially in the south where it's a little colder. Um, and yeah, and to change this to a larger scale, to architecture, to have 20 of these pieces, 24 in one space, which also constantly moving. This is also something I forgot to mention, but you have the pieces that people can move on the wall, for example, with these cables, but the pieces that are hanging are also constantly moving by themselves, slowly with the wind, with the air circulation. If there's, or if even somebody walks by, that creates a small, like a very light breeze, and that will also affect the curtain. So it's a space that is in constant movement. And now we almost at the end of the PDF. This is another project in Mexico, where weaving is still very important. And here I also decided to work with two different studios. So one is Miriam here, and she weaves with a backstrap loom, which is the indigenous loom, and also dyes with natural pigments. We mostly with black and white, but she did dye one piece yellow with from these flowers that you can see here. And these were installed in an exhibition space in Cuernavaca. This is the former studio and home of David Alfaro Siqueiros, the muralist. It was his former studio that now it was renovated, and there was a large, a big sort of architectural renovation, I think 2010. So here again, we produce with Miriam a bunch of curtains that were hand woven and hand embroidered, and then another group of curtains that were woven too, but in a pedal loom in Oaxaca. So the pedal loom is the loom that came from Europe, came from with Spanish, and so we have these two sort of histories of weaving. And the pedal loom is a thick. They both work with wool, but one is much more light. The indigenous loom is much more. The textile is much more light and a little bit transparent, and the pedal loom is thicker. It looks like a carpet almost, like very thick. And the decision of working with black and white was to focus also on these two sort of technical aspects that, they look pretty similar from far, but when you get close, you start seeing that they're also very different, made differently. And here also, one thing to mention is that Siqueiros, especially in this room here, he also developed this concept called the polyangularity. So this is like multiple angles, and it was a way for him to the way he understood muralism. And most of his murals, of course, are figurative and representational, and they as also as Rivera and Orozco, they basically show the history of Mexico, the Mexican Revolution, the indigenous culture, the arrival of industrialization, and so on, the whole history of Mexico in muralism. But he was of this group of muralists. He was interested in space and in the three-dimensionality of space, of how you can also use ceilings, the floor, that murals didn't have to be just one, dimension. It could be multiple dimension. And again, depending on your position in space, you will also perceive these murals in a different way. So he worked with this concept of polyangularity. And this also I try to apply to the curtains. Like the way I work is I made the drawings, like each drawing had different versions of the same drawing. And to end the presentation here, this is also a workshop I did in Chile, which was right before we published the book and we did the exhibition. And again, a workshop with about 60 participants, from very young people to older people, from all different sorts of cultural backgrounds, social backgrounds, from different parts of Santiago. And it was super interesting and beautiful in the way that it became a place of gathering, a place of conversation, and a place of sharing knowledge, and also a place to also break barriers between different social classes and backgrounds. Because Santiago is still sadly like this. Like, now I live in Belgium, and it's a much more sort of homogeneous society. In Chile, you can still feel sadly big differences. And I think that's it for now.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think there are a lot of very interesting moments for us, different formats of interaction, workshops, working with laboratories, and so on, and the ways the audience can interact, can involved in this process of moving, of touching the curtains, and so on. And I want to emphasize the moment, the collaboration moment. You talked about it a lot, but again, I want to emphasize it a little bit, and the role of the artistic aspect in this collaborative processes. All of the meetings and labs and people who are into the production together with you. Those meetings, they don't exist in isolation, and they contribute to the project as a whole, as far as I understand, influencing its artistic form and artistic realization. And I want to ask you to talk a little bit more about this connection between collaboration as it is and the final artistic form, the final result of a production, if we can say it like that.
Yeah, I think what um and this might sound a little strange, but what I think what's most important of this collaboration, of this moment of exchange, this is the way I see it, is also a little bit of a void, like I'm never sure of what's going to be the final result, and that I think for most artists is pretty scary, and of course for me also it's a little bit it's a leap, I just have to trust the people, and it could be one person, it could be 60 people, but it's a matter of trusting. And I think this trust and this leap between not knowing exactly how the end result is going to be, it's in a way it's a little bit frightening, but also very alive, very much alive, because it creates a lot of surprise and surprises. Like I'm luckily, because it could seem very repetitive and monotonous, and okay, always these crazy shapes, which we haven't. I have to talk about the drawings still, as symbols, as possible symbols, or imaginary symbols. But I'm pretty, so there's things I can control, like the drawings and the way I produce them. But then what happens after is a little bit uncontrollable, or it's more than uncontrollable. I learn to guide a sort of a dialogue, a communication, understanding different positions, how these positions can work together and create something together, like I said before. But during this process, there's always a matter. There's sort of like a moment of suspense, or there's also sort of a tension of suspense that is only resolved at the end when I install the work. Then the work is sort of complete, and I think it's also a surprise for the people who work with me, because they have never seen an embroidery made by hand in that scale or in that kind of space. So I think the surprise goes both ways, and that's for me is the most rewarding. Is this surprise factor?
And I want to specify just one moment. So the final architecture of the curtains in the end is a result of this process. So you do not know from the beginning how those objects will be installed, yes?
Yeah, I mean, there's certain sort of guidelines that, for example, I know the size, I know how many, but then the installation of how they're gonna be installed in space, yes, I don't know I mean, I can have some ideas, of course, and I look at the floor plan and I see how the space is built, or how people move in it, or it depends too, like if it's a space just for me, or if there's other artwork also, it changes. But in general, the spatial disposition, in general, it's also a conversation and a dialogue with the curator, or I can come with an idea, but that idea, it might work or it might be better depending on the suggestion of other person or another person, and in this case a curator or somebody I'm working with, or another artist. And so again, the work is also open in the sense, it's open in the terms of production, and this is why I also try to say that what I'm trying to achieve is a project that is as also horizontal as possible. I know it's not going to be completely horizontal. I'm the artist, I take the decisions, it's my name, but I try to make it as horizontal as possible. And in this sense, the installation of the work also functions this way. Like I can have an idea, but maybe the curator, for example, what I show you from the Sao Paulo Biennial, I had a completely different idea, and that big wall was a suggestion by Jochen, and at the end it worked. So the work is also open to yeah, in, input of the curators too. They can decide too how to place the works.
So it's kind of a network.
Yes, it's a constant dialogue too. The definition of the work too.
And before we move further to our next questions, I think it's appropriate to ask this question now after the presentation about curtains. We talked about the role of the outside in your project when we looked through the site and the archive. And can you say maybe just a couple of words about the projects that are about the outside, when you are working with the space outside, not with the exhibitional spaces, but outside some landscapes or the houses? And why is it important, firstly? And secondly, the question of, I don't know, preservation, conservation of the curtains because of, I don't know, we can think of rain or wind or so on, and it changes not only the shadows, but rain can change the way the curtain looks. Is it important for you, these things about preserving and so on, and why outside is important?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the outside is important for me because it basically again breaks this barrier between anything inside a museum, inside a gallery is sort of protected, or sort of protected symbolically and physically. Even when I have this problem also with a few spaces where I ask the people that, yeah, they can touch the work, but at the end, it could also be problematic for the institution. They don't know how to handle it, or they want to have everybody to wear gloves. And I'm like, no, no, gloves. Nobody's going to have eaten a hot dog and then touch the thing. I mean, people enter museums pretty, with their hands clean, I guess, I hope. But the outdoors is important because it's breaks this barrier between this sort of overprotection that we have with art. It's like overly protected many times, and if it has economic value, of course, it's even more protected. Also symbolic value, of course. But I see it as a way also to bring the work outside to so people can enjoy it in a different context too. For me, it's architecture is important, but also nature, and also how people interact with nature, or how if you remember that photo of in Nicaragua, there was a tree that somebody painted with stripes, like all these things. Like there's also ways that people uh, I think it's what I'm trying to say is that it's a way to sort of uh, make art less, I mean, it's still serious, but it's less intimidating, and it's I feel it more democratic in a way that it could basically be placed anywhere. And in terms of conservation, I know this is a risk, and it happened before, and it's happened a few times where if the work's outside for 3 months or a week or even a year, for example, some of the panels that were at the Paris Art Museum were outside for a whole year. And then, of course, the sun, and in Miami especially, affects, and the colors change completely. So from having a bright, almost fluorescent pink, you end up with a pale pink, like a more quiet pink. But I think this is beautiful because also the piece is aging. It's like a piece that is lived, it's not a piece that is intact, and it's like it comes out of the box and like, oh, here I am. No, it's a piece that you know, has been to a few parties, we could say. And I have this problem too, but it's not a problem that, it doesn't make me lose my sleep or worry too much, because I think, okay, there's maybe of all the curtains I've made, maybe 20 are damaged, but it's something that I can live with. It's not problematic, and I actually find beautiful that they have some like some life in them and livelihood. For example, yesterday I'm here in New York for a couple of weeks, and I went to my storage to pick up work that I'm going to show in a couple of weeks in the UK. And yeah, and a few of these curtains have like the color changed, and but there's these outdoor pieces. What I showed in Mexico too. This is what I'm going to show in England. And yeah, and it just the color changed, and it looks old and it looks a little bit damaged, but the work is still the same. Yeah, does that answer? I'm not really worried about how they. I mean, for me, it's interesting and it's beautiful if they get affected in the outdoors. It's not a problem.
Yeah, thank you. And I think the first thing I thought was rain, but sun, I think, is more
Yeah.
in this case is more influential thing. I think we can move further, and Natalia, please.
Yes, I would like to ask you about the avant-garde, and the role of, for example, Lisitsky in particular, and you talked now about Rodchenko. Why is the avant-garde language so important to you? You talked about it, but I would like that you specify, is it important on a visual level, or it reflects something else that is important to your practice?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's different levels of connection or interest with the avant-garde, of course, and one is, of course, visual, but within this visual realm, there's a lot of experimentation too. So I think the visual is sort of just the first layer, but then you have experimentation with materials, with formats. Lesinski, the way he understood this sort of intersection of art and architecture, and not only art and architecture, but also art and politics, or how art could be in working for a political cause, or sort of trying to push a political movement. So then, not only the sort of his the work he's mostly known for, but also as a designer, as a photographer, like a multidisciplinary artist, and this is also something that has always interested me in this sort of constant um, strive for experimenting, and experimental both formally and materially, but also socially, how you can also expand all these formal components, all this visual experimentation, material experimentation into a social context, which is what I'm trying to do from the beginning. I think like curtains have always been about expanding the formal into the social, and how this can create a dialogue that goes two ways, and and the avant-garde is also very important as a European and Russian, because what I said before, that it's sort of a it's one part of the equation, but then you have the other part of the equation, which is all these histories of abstractions in the global south related to maybe to textile traditions, to indigenous traditions. So or in the US also, there's a whole uh, uh, understanding now in the recent years, in the last 10, 15 years maybe, of there's a whole history of African American also use of abstraction and geometry, which was also completely ignored. Or even the history of quilts in the US. The quilts work with abstraction, but there's different ways of quilting. The quilts, for example, in the south of the States, are very different from the quilts in the north. The quilts in the south are African American, and because they come from very poor backgrounds, they will recycle pieces of small scraps of fabric. So then you have quilts that are much more experimental in form and organic in shape and so on. And in contrast, in the northeast, where it's more like a white tradition of quilting, they work with geometric patterns and much more sort of organized and structured. That also comes from this sort of European also mentality. So the avant-garde is very important, but it's also like one part of the puzzle, and I'm trying to make these different parts conversate, learn from each other, and me learning also from them. Um, so yeah, no, all the avant-garde is very important for me, and especially in the way they understood art as a educational tool, collaborative tool, experimental tool, for again, art, design, architecture, and in the case of Lesinski, so I would say his name wrong, Lesinski, Lesinski, Lesinski. He also was, quote unquote, a curator too. He organized exhibitions, displays, exhibition design, and this is also something that is of my interest a lot.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And about educational tool, I would like to ask you about Manuel Casanueva, because you met Manuel Casanueva Carrasco in person. And could you tell us how you first met him and how you discovered his work in the first place?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, should we show images of him maybe while I talk?
Yes.
So Manuel Casanova, I met in 2000, I think it was 2012, in a trip to Chile. So I was in Valparaiso. We went to the architecture school, which is this is a school that was funded in the early 50s in Valparaiso, and it's an experimental architecture school that basically sort of understands uh, the teaching of architecture as a sort of as a multidisciplinary system or method, where it's not only architecture but also they confront it with art and poetry. So it's a very experimental school. And Manuel, who's an architect by training, he studied in this school. He was always also very interested in sports. He was a big fan of sports and the technology of sports and sort of the history of sports. Even from, like, if you look at his drawings and notebooks, he has drawings from like jousting from like the medieval times. Like this, he was like always researching different sports, historical sports. In Latin America also, like the Aztec sort of version of football, and so on, the Mesoamerican version of football. And he created this course called Torneos, which is a sort of these experimental games where people, there were teams, there was an objective, there were rules. And I met him with Maria, again, going back to how I met him, and he was still uh, pretty functional, but he had Parkinson, so he was had a lot of difficulties moving and a little bit difficulties even speaking. But he was pretty energetic, and I met him. I went to his home with Maria, and I was immediately struck by this all this documentation. He started showing these photos, and again, this is something that is very, I think, super important in the history of cultural history of Chile, but we never studied this in art school. Like nobody talked about this in art school. No, they didn't mention the architecture school as a point of reference because of its experimentation. And I was just like, I fell in love with these torneos because basically I find very interesting that you have an architecture school that has a sport class that is doing these collective performances and very sort of cathartic and playful performances. And also in a period of Chile, a very complicated period. This is in the between 74 and early 90s. So it's basically during the whole dictatorship that people were doing, studying in the school and performing these activities, these sports. And what's a uniting sort of thread, or the common thread between all of them, is that there's always an artifact or an element that will interfere how your body moves in space, or how you interact with other people, or how you interact with the field, with the rules of the game. And so Manolo is important for me because also it's sort of like another piece of this huge puzzle that I don't know how big it is, but it's pretty big. But sort of another history of experimentation, of spatial experimentation, of formal experimentation, of collective experimentation. And there's also a lot of like smiles and happiness in the photo. You see really people are enjoying doing this. This, for example, is called what I forgot the name now, but it's related to the baseball glove. So as I say,
we don't see anything.
no, you don't see. Oh, I thought I was showing images all the and now.
No. It's okay. Now we see. Yes.
Yes, it's okay. Thank you.
Sorry.
Hmm.
So we go back. And then, because of my interest in these sort of hidden histories and yeah, in Latin America, I decided to make a book of the torneos, and this was at the same time that I did the exhibition at this place in Mexico, the Museum Experimental El Eco, and which by coincidence, the Experimental Museum El Eco in Mexico was founded in 1952 or built in 1952, 53, around those years. And the School of Valparaiso was sort of founded at the same time. So it's like you have these two histories of experimental architecture that didn't also know each other. Like they have never been a direct contact. So my proposition for the Museum in Mexico was to create a group of curtains, but also invite other artists and projects to dialogue with the curtains and with the space. And the first project we did was with Manuel. We showed photos and videos of Manuel as a way also to make these two histories, connect and get to know each other. And again, you see these are stills with these sort of banners or wings that also, I think, if it's windy, they also, push you around a little bit. It's not so easy to walk. And then what's super interesting for me is that this was all class, in the school. It was what they consider the physical education class. So this replaced like before this, people were doing football or volleyball or like regular sports, and Manuel proposed to create their own what he called tournaments. And then each student, you had a color assigned to you, like because there was different teams, so you had different colors, but then each student will also design, their own structure in a slightly different way. This one is called Snake Dance, which I've done a couple of exhibitions of Manuel. It's very simple documentation, photos and video, so it's sort of an easy show to install. But then a lot of people also ask me if to reenact some of the tournaments, and I think it's really hard because these were like a whole semester, months of work of research and of developing the structures, the rules, and I don't think it's something you can do in a day or two or even a week. And the only tournament that I feel comfortable reenacting is this one because it's very simple. You just tie people. Here they created these sort of suits. You don't see it because the image is in black and white. But one team was red and the other team had blue stripes, red stripes, blue stripes. And so this I reenacted a couple of times and in different places and with different, like in Brazil, in New York, and in Brussels recently in Belgium. And but the effect is always the same. It's so sort of fun. Like people are not used to be so close to each other, especially if you don't know them. And it just creates this very sort of fun, energetic moment. The leader of the group has to lead the way, and then the rest has to follow. Because you're tied so together, that creates this intimacy, but also, you don't control completely your movements. And the last time we did it in Belgium, it was fun because a friend came and with her partner, and she's a curator too, and she was very interested in the project, and she brought her 2 children, 2 girls like 9 and 6 years old or 7. And we decided to put the two girls in the front, so they were the head of the snake. And because they were children, of course, it was super fun, and they did a lot of crazy stuff. This is the one I was mentioning before that is based on the baseball glove. So he's interested in how the glove has this structure and this material that is meant to catch a ball in very high speed, a very heavy ball. So he said, okay, why don't we do a glove that where you inside the glove, you inside this. And this is a game with a ball too, but and also because he liked to make things fun. I don't know how he did it, but it was played in the dark. And I think each structure had sort of like a lantern, something with the batteries, I imagine. You see the ball is here. I think that's a ball. This one is vertical rugby, so it's like the opposite. Rugby is a high-speed sport, very strength and speed. But here it's more about it's strength, but it's more about equilibrium, and and it's a slow process. And the contest was to who made the highest human pyramid to hold the ball, and so on. But there's many tournaments, and I shared a video with Natalia that you can share later with everybody, or we can put it in the chat. But there's also a very nice video if you want to see. I can show it now too if you want, or we can put it in the background. That's okay?
Yes, why not?
Okay. So 3 tournaments, the culture of the body. Manuel Casanueva. And there's also this use of these artifacts, but also this sort of customs they build and they make, and they become something else or somebody else. And this is also related with the school. The school had a tradition within the sort of the poetic side of the school, which is called Falen, which is a poetic, collaborative poetic actions. And it was a way to make poetry become alive and interact and collaborative, and also aware of the space and the context and the city, not only indoors. They also do a lot of poetry outdoors. And for most of the Falens, they will also sort of dress up in a special way. Like it's a very performative school, like so this is it's sort of an intersection of sports and performance, collective performance. And the exhibition is called Ball as Field and the Players Ball. And it's based on this tournament, which now they're just fooling around. And most of the tournaments, or all of them, I could say, they have the rules, they have their own rules, but at the same time, they were open to chaos and to improvisation and to just play, So here they just throwing the ball around. But the objective of this tournament was they have to throw a player on top of the ball, so the ball becomes the field. And then the team has to lift the ball and move him, I don't know, like 100 meters or something like this. So now they're just fooling around, but you will see now how they start throwing the play on top. So again, here the player becomes the ball becomes the field, and there's a lot of sense of humor too. Like, they have this blanket next to him in case he falls. And I spoke to one of the professors, not Manuel because Manuel passed away, but I spoke to one of the professors, and he will say that they base this on this. When you look at cartoons, there's always, if somebody's going to fall from a fire, the firemen have this blanket to rescue him, and this is how they came up with the idea of the blanket. and again, this is all happening in Chile during the dictatorship. So I think it's a very interesting way to sort of create this sort of social and political resistance, but without being directly political. It's like they're creating their own way of experimenting, of playing, of enjoying being together, which at the time was also, and in a way, they were also very privileged because they were protected by the university, the Catholic University of Valparaiso, which is also sort of a traditional institution. And because of I think the relationship to the Catholic Church, they were also somehow protected. But within this protection, they did a lot, of interesting things. And in this tournament here, they have to design and build a mask, which you cannot see unless you jump. So then this is Manuel. He's here on the front, and he's placing a color and a number to each player. And then you have to find so you're 19, and you have to find the number 20 and the number 18, and then create a human chain. But the only way to do this is by jumping around. And what's also important here is that the beach where they are, it's called Ritoque. It's a beach close to Valparaiso. It's about like a 20-30 minute drive north from Valparaiso, from the port of Valparaiso, which is the school is. And in Ritoque, a group of professors in the late 60s, they bought a piece of land and they decided to create an architecture um, sort of community where they live and work and teach. And so this is the beach, which is public, but then if you go up a little bit and there's like a small hills, that's where they live and they teach. And it's still functioning today. And you can visit it. They're open to visitors every Wednesday during the academic year. And I think this is the last one of the video, and this one is based on the hamster, how the hamster is running on this wheel, like eternally not going anywhere. So he proposed the students to create a human hamster structure, and built with coligüe, which is a kind of bamboo that grows in Chile. So it's a native plant, and only with this bamboo called coligüe and tied, no nails, no glue, nothing, just tying it. And this is also something, going back to the first question, like my relationship to Chile, and that I believe that because it's so fragile and so precarious, and we don't have the strong institutions, or you don't have like one way of making art or one way of making a career, or the perfect way, or like if I compare it to New York or the US, you know, most successful artists I know here, they either did the Whitney program or they did a master in Columbia, or there's all these structures that you're supposed to be part of or follow. And I think because and it's either that or you are successful in the market or and so on, or maybe you become a teacher. But because in Chile, like nothing is, we don't have these paths, these determined paths. I think that gives space also to all this experimentation, to all this trying to find your own voice, your own way of making art or architecture or pedagogy or and it's also but done in a very fun way, which like with enjoyment, which I think it's important.
I think we need reenactment of some tournament here in Russia.
Yes.
Yes, sure.
Yes. And this video it ends very beautifully. We only have a couple minutes left. But yeah, we'll go to the end because it ends very nicely. And it's very beautiful this ending because for the school is also very aware of its place, in the world, in geography, and for them the ocean, the wind, it's very important, as a source of inspiration of understanding how the cities functions, how people live, uh, and yeah, it's a nice gesture of like throwing them into the ocean and let whatever has to happen happen.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for showing the video, especially. I think it gives another dimension if we compare to just photos.
Yes.
And I want to ask our listeners, maybe some of you want to join and comment or ask question, maybe. Christina.
Hey, sorry. I was without the camera for a while, but thank you so much for the presentation and for showing these materials. And I wanted to ask two questions. I think one is connected to the footage we just saw, because I think maybe I missed it a little. The participants of this tournament and of all these actions that were involved, were they the students of the campus, or they could have
No,
been from different groups?
no, they were mostly students from the school. Yeah, it's a class. It's a sport class in this architecture school. So it's all students.
Okay, thank you. And the other question I have is more connected to your practice and to the things that you said at the very beginning. Because you said and then you repeated just a few seconds ago that you have the sense of fragility when it comes to your personal relation to Chile.
Mhm.
And given your practice and given your experience of working with different communities, different social groups, different people who can be artists or can find themselves doing artistic practice while being in exile. Do you feel that you share the same fragility with them, or do you sort of encounter a different type of fragility every time you work with a different group? Or how do you address it?
Um, I think it's interesting because it's a little bit of both at the same time. Like it's sometimes it's sort of like the same fragility because we're all people, but this fragility also changes depending on the context. And this is also the way I see the curtains, uh, come to live or come to become curtains. Like they always affected by the different contexts, different people, different histories, and so it's a little bit of both. Like there's like a common thread, but also many differences. And I see this also in the language I use, in the visual language I use, so this geometric abstraction, which is it's supposed to be universal, but at the same time it could be because of each project is developed in a different way. It becomes also very local, and at the same time, the drawings, and this is also something I forgot to mention, that for me it's very important because I create the drawings following a set of rules, and this very formal, like I create a grid, and then what can I do with this grid? Um, but by having these rules and sort of these limits allows me to develop drawings that maybe I would never done before. Like, for example, in one notebook, I could say, okay, one page is going to be lines that don't intersect, and then another is going to be angles that don't intersect, and then another is going to be angles that intersect, and another that lines that don't intersect. And so I create this structure, sort of rules of the game, which that's also why I'm interested in Manuel and the tournaments. But then you play with these rules, and these rules also allow you to like really experiment. And I don't see it as a limitation, but also mostly as a freeing component. Like I really make drawings that I've never thought of before, and at the same time, these drawings have a interesting aspect, or I think a beautiful aspect, which is uh, they have this sort of ambiguous time situation. Like they could be very ancient from an ancient culture, or they could be from the future. Like if I were to plan a sci-fi film and I could create an alphabet, maybe it would look like that. So it has this playfulness with time too, and with different cultures and different contexts. Uh, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you so much.
Yeah.
So maybe any other questions?
I have a question. I was also without a camera. Um, you were mentioning just before something about the language or the maybe sometimes narratives or that hold abstraction, most of all in certain cultures in Latin America.
Mhm.
But you didn't went further on that. I'm just curious about what's your take on that? Because I know that, or we live in a moment where representation is very important for many reasons in representation in art, like very direct, but abstraction has also a kind of important role in many times in resistance. And so I don't know how, if you see a link between that, or how, or what were you going to say about um, narratives and
Mhm.
thoughts in abstraction, or yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you. Juan Pablo is a good friend from Brussels, so I introduced him, and also an artist from Colombia. And well, yeah, it's a little bit tricky because abstraction is supposed to not have narrative. I mean, we're supposed to fight against narrative, or supposed to create a um, formal narrative. Like um, and in that way, I think but at the same time, I see each drawing as a symbol that can be interpreted in many ways. Like sometimes people make associations, and sometimes not. And I think I prefer to keep this open and ambiguous, uh, because yeah, because and maybe the narrative, maybe the only sort of, I could say there's a little bit of a narrative aspect if when I place the curtains in relation to a context, to like say what happens in Nicaragua, or what happens with the houses in the Dominican Republic, And then you sort of create a sort of a conversation with something local that's very specific from that place, even in terms of geography, landscape, architecture. But once you take it out of that conversation, it becomes more abstract. And I'm precisely interested in this, how this abstraction can be useful in many ways and sort of create a language that is trying to create, instead of narratives, moments of exchange and of conversation where people meet and get to know each other and learn from each other. So it's not about telling a story, it's sort of about creating moments, I think, or situations of how people can, yeah, learn from each other, get to know each other, and especially trying to break this barrier between, you know, abstract art and geometric art and conceptual art, and has a very bad reputation of being too isolated, too inward, too elitist. And this is, I think, maybe the narrative that I want to create is to break this, to open it up.
Thank you.
No?
So any other questions maybe? So I have one, if I may ask. It's a question about notebooks and this form that you showed when you showed curtains, and you told that it, in some ways, it became a space for interaction with people who you worked with. And I want to ask, can you tell a little bit more about this form of expression that you used? And do you show those notebooks during the exhibitions, or is it just a kind of an archive material?
It's mostly an archive material, but in some occasions I have shown them. And in some occasions I show several notebooks or a video of a notebook or videos of the different notebooks. So yeah, it's a material that I show, but occasionally, not always. And I can also show now, so for example, here we have, and what's important for me is yeah, these are like the starting point of a project. For example, this one is for an exhibition in Ghent in Belgium, and it's also in the Industry Museum, which is a museum that is dedicated to the industrial history of Belgium, with a strong focus on the textile history of Ghent, which is a cotton history, mechanized cotton production that started with the Industrial Revolution, and Ghent became sort of like after Manchester, probably one of the largest centers of cotton production. And so you see, but at the beginning, it's just abstract. And in this case, the rules were very simple. It was shapes, lines, shapes, lines. And then I showed these notebooks to the people that I'm going to work with. And this was for a workshop that lasted 2 months during a residency. It was a residency where I proposed to do a workshop. We met twice a week. Sometimes it was 5 people, sometimes 15, sometimes 2, sometimes 8. Every Wednesday and every Sunday. But the notebooks are, yes, the starting point. And I enjoy showing them, but not always. I mean, it depends on the exhibition, depends on the context. I've done shows where I show, because I have a large archive of sort of studies and drawings that go back from the mid-90s. So I've done a couple of shows where I show as much as I can of this archive material. But yes, and what's important for me too is that I'm keeping those archive material together. I've never sold a notebook, or I think only once I sold a few drawings to somebody that, because he was super insisted in interested in. Okay, I sold him a few drawings, but most of them, I would say 99%, I keep. And again, here, it's an open design. Then I can show you also how this looked in the space. while it loads. And do you see the photos of the show? Yes.
No, not yet.
Not yet. And the video you saw the video?
Yes, the video. Yes, but now just
Okay.
colorful stripes.
1 second, please. And you see it now?
Yes.
So this is the result of that. So you see, so for the notebook, you have now this, and it's a big jump. And it again, it's the drawings change and mutate depending on the fabric that we're using. In this case, it was all textiles, cotton textile with the fabric that was produced in the museum, because they still have machines that function and are constantly producing fabric. So I work with the backgrounds that they have. You know, this red stripe background this was one pattern that was a kitchen towel that I put 3 pieces together. And then like this, and all this done also during the workshop. So getting people together, embroidering together, and working with the patterns that the museum produces. So, and these are images of the workshop. So yes, the notebooks are very important. The notebooks are the beginning of each project. That's how I start. And here, in this case, because we are in Belgium, and so there's a different relationship to craft, and I think it's sort of something that people did maybe when they were very young, or they did it once or twice, and they have this sort of fond memory. So the workshop also became a moment where people could sort of, sort of get a renewed interest and sort of passion for embroidering, and again sharing time together, and these spaces become like social club, educational social club. Yeah. And then there's other notebooks like this. This is one of the 2 notebooks I did for the project in Mexico. So this is what I was talking about, the polyangular sort of concept of cicados. So you see this sort of, there's always different sort of point of views of one image or one space. So here I did 4 sort of versions of the same drawings. And actually here I have a little box with all this material. I'm gonna hopefully bring this back with me now to Belgium. Okay.
That's okay. Yeah, thank you. I think for me, it was very interesting to see the starting point and then how it is transformed into the exhibition space. So I want to thank you so much for spending, I think, 2 hours with us and sharing your experience and story. And I believe it was really inspiring for us to hear about your work, and thank you. We really appreciate it.
No,
And
thank you.
yeah, wishing you all the best with all your future projects. And thank you for all the participants who are here today with us. And I think that this is an incredible experience and discussion for our project. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. And thank you for reaching out, Natalia. It was very nice to have these months of conversation and dialogue. And even I know the difficult circumstances you are, and the whole world now is upside down. Everything is going, I mean, it's getting worse day after day. And I think we have to try to stick together and hopefully change the situation.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much. Thank you for the
Yeah.
presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's
Bye,
always
everyone.
a pleasure to talk with you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Okay, bye. Thank you.